Next item of business is portfolio questions. And in order to get as many people in as possible, prefer short, succinct questions and answers to match. Now, questions 2, 7 and 8, as well as questions 3 and 4 are grouped together. For those questions that are grouped, I'll take supplementaries after I've taken all questions included in the group. If a member wishes to request a supplementary question, they should press the Request to Speak button or indicate so in the chat function by entering the letter R during the relevant question. Question number 1. Alison Johnson, please.
To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of the impact on the rural economy of wildlife crime linked to grouse moor management.
Minister Marie Goujon, please.
Biodiversity and thriving wildlife underpins Scotland's rural economy, and wildlife crime is completely unacceptable for many reasons, including the damage that it can do to our economy and our international reputation.
We have a little time this afternoon, so I haven't to jump so fast. Alison Johnson, please.
Thank you. Last week, the Government published a long-awaited report on the socio-economic and biodiversity impacts of driven grouse moor management, which is expected to inform the Government's long-awaited announcement on how and whether it will regulate grouse moors. However, the report entirely omits the impact of wildlife crime, which the Scottish Government's own research has linked to intensive grouse moor management. So can the Minister explain why this was omitted and whether it was on request from stakeholders on the advisory group for the report, the majority of whom represent the industry?
Minister.
I'm sure the member will be aware that we'd commissioned this research. This is phase 2 of a programme of research that we had intended to carry out, and this was primarily on the biodiversity and economic impacts of grouse moors that was again published last week. So, of course, that together with the earlier phase of research that we had done and together with the Werrity report, we will look at all of these reports in the round as we come to consider and issue our response to the Werrity review, which we have said in the programme for government and reiterate we will be bringing to Parliament later in the autumn. So all of the research that we have commissioned will feed into that response. There are lots of different issues here. Alison Johnson raises wildlife crime. Of course, that's a vitally important aspect of the work that we have been considering as parts of the various pieces of research that we've done and the wider Werrity review as well. So, of course, that feeds into any decision making that we will be taking. And again, we consider all of this information in the round.
Question 2, Mary Fee, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what financial support is available for tourism businesses.
Cabinet Secretary Fergus Hume.
As outlined in the Scottish Government's strategic framework, from 2nd November onwards, grants of £2,000 or £3,000, depending upon rateable value, will be available for businesses required to close by law. A hardship grant of £1,400 or £2,100, depending on rateable value, will also be available for businesses that remain open but are directly impacted by restrictions. These grants, to be administered by local authorities, will be provided regardless of level to any eligible business and will cover every 4 weeks of restrictions.
Mary Fee.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response? Many tourism businesses depend on visitors travelling from across Scotland, and with travel restrictions placed on cross-boundary travel, how will the Scottish Government tailor support for tourism businesses, taking account of the level of restrictions they find themselves in?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the travel guidance does, of course, have an impact in preventing people from the Central Belt travelling firth thereof. And that means that the available market for hotels, for visitor attractions, out with the Central Belt has diminished as a result. In addition to that, the fact that there has been a lockdown in England, Presiding Officer, also has substantially reduced the market. Thus far, the distinction that we've made, to answer Ms Fee's question, is to look at those businesses that must close by law, that have to close, and apply a payment to them, recognising that they can make no trading income at all, and those who are permitted to trade, but whose trade has been impacted by COVID. I do recognise, Presiding Officer, that one can argue there are gradations of impact, and that is undoubtedly true. But we do have to come up with a scheme, we do have to get the money out the door, and I'm very pleased that we've come up with this distinction between, if you like, hardship and closure, and as I say, the grants apply from the 2nd of November onward.
Question 7, Sandra White.
Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what support it is providing tourist attractions in light of the ongoing restrictions due to COVID-19.
Cabinet Secretary.
As part of our £2.3 billion package of support to businesses, we have already provided over £40 million to date, not including provisions through our new £48 million COVID business support as a result of break restrictions and the strategic framework. I fully appreciate the impact the pandemic continues to have on the tourism sector, and we are continually seeking to find a balance between action to suppress the virus and the protection of people's jobs and livelihoods. I recently met with the Association of Scottish Visitor Attractions on 4th November in order fully to understand the current challenges they face.
Sandra White.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his reply, and I do understand the Scottish Government has committed, funding to the visitors' attractions. However, I just wanted to ask the Cabinet Secretary, would he be able to commit to providing additional support to ensure iconic visitor attractions, such as Kelvingrove Art Gallery Museum in my constituency, draws tourists from around the world? Would you be able to continue to remain sustainable post-COVID-19? And what support can he give to iconic buildings and museums such as the Kelvingrove?
Cabinet Secretary, did you get all that?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
Did you hear that?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. To answer Ms White, who advocates the interests of the visitor attractions, including the magnificent Kelvingrove Art Gallery in her constituency, I would say that we are obviously sympathetic to the impacts on business. Our aim throughout is to provide lifeline support to Presiding Officer, in other words, to enable businesses to survive through this COVID period, however long it may last, and not knowing the duration of the impacts makes that task somewhat challenging. So that is the aim of the task, and I want to say that obviously we are looking very carefully at consequentials, Barnett consequentials funding available to us, and we are looking how best to deploy those, having regard to the need to provide that lifeline support, taking account of what support some businesses may already have received, and also having particular regard to those businesses and sectors who may not already have received any support, Presiding Officer. These are difficult matters, but I'm acutely aware of the importance of them, and they are being given, therefore, priority.
Question 8, Tom Mason.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what input the Scottish tourist sector has had into its decision-making on the COVID-19 restrictions.
Cabinet Secretary.
We have maintained regular contact with the Scottish Licensed Trade Association, Scottish Tourism Alliance, UK Hospitality, and many other tourism business representative bodies and organisations throughout the pandemic, in order fully to appreciate and understand the current challenges they face. For example, we decided in consultation with the industry to close wet pubs by law in the current guidelines, which came into force on Monday, November 2nd, to enable them to access the most appropriate level of support, given that they would be unviable with drink sales alone. We will continue to engage the sector in order to help support those businesses.
Tom Mason.
I thank the Cabinet Officer for that answer. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Conservatives have called for a business advisory council to give businesses a seat at the table that they have been asking for since this pandemic began. This should almost certainly include representation from the Scottish tourist sector that has been among the worst hit by the pandemic. The tourist sector, as indeed most other business sectors, has clearly indicated it wishes to be actively engaged with government. And a formal council will ensure that a future guidance on restrictions is rooted in practical concerns of the businesses and that have to follow it. Will the Minister back this proposal?
Last question. Yes.
Presiding Officer, we have engaged thoroughly, in depth and repeatedly with business organisations since March. We debated this thoroughly yesterday when that particular proposal was rejected. The Conservatives have failed to provide any detail about what this council would do, what it would comprise, who would serve on it, what its remit would be, who would be excluded therefrom. Now, I've engaged with all said organisations on an extremely regular basis, and I am absolutely certain that we not only engage with them, but we listen to them and we understand their concerns. At the end of the day, we in the government have to make the decisions with the balance between public health and lives and livelihoods. That's a difficult act, but I can assure you, Presiding Officer, that whilst we're always ready to consider any detailed proposal, none has arrived from the Scottish Conservatives, despite being asked by one of our representatives for such details. None have arrived. I do not know whether across the business community this proposal actually has had support. I haven't actually been asked to adopt it, but the main thing is that myself and my colleagues are in regular, indeed almost daily, contact with everybody involved. And I think we actually have established fairly good relationships with almost all of them, to the extent that the current arrangements are as efficacious as they possibly can be.
I have 4 members wanting to ask supplementaries in this group, and I'll try to take them all, so try to keep crisp. Willie Rennie, followed by Kenneth Gibson.
Travel agents have been working through the pandemic to get customers' holiday payments back, but have earned nothing from it in the process. Will the Minister consider a special fund, just like the one being considered in Northern Ireland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm happy to undertake to Mr Rennie, as I think I did yesterday in the debate, that we are sympathetic to all those who have been impacted by COVID to a major extent, and that includes the vast majority of the tourism sector, and therefore I will undertake to look very carefully at this. If he has any more details of what he believes would be appropriate, then I'm happy to meet with Mr Rennie and discuss them. I'm always ready to consider any detailed constructive proposal from wherever it comes.
Kenneth Gibson, followed by Oliver Mundell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary has been very proactive in supporting tourism businesses, large and small, throughout the pandemic with limited resources. Can I advise what further steps will be taken to support larger tourism businesses, particularly throughout the winter, such as hotels, which tend to have high overheads and are often major employers in small and medium-sized communities?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, Mr Gibson has been tireless in his advocacy for his constituents in Arran, for example, who were extremely worried at the beginning of this crisis about the ferry situation, which I think has been ameliorated since then, to some extent at least. We have launched the £14 million hotel support programme to support businesses and jobs in the hotel sector. The enterprise agencies are in the process of finalising grant support now. I actually spoke to Charlotte Wright just this morning, the Chief Executive of HIE. That work is nearing completion. And again, it is my hope, Presiding Officer, that the consequentials may allow us to enhance and extend the support. Major hotels are major employers of many, many people. That is why in Scotland, and I'm not sure it's been done anywhere else in the UK, we did establish this £14 million hotel support programme in order to support people in their jobs.
Oliver Mundell, followed by Maureen Watt.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. With travel restrictions and other necessary restrictions in place, does the Cabinet Secretary recognise that the distinction between open and closed is meaningless for many accommodation businesses who are closed in all but name and cannot be viable at this time?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, there's a vast range of circumstances, actually. I think that in general terms the impact on accommodation providers is most likely to be the most significant, because the diminution in the available market of customers and the fact that the regulations, there is a certain worry that the regulations may be extended and therefore causing forward cancellation of bookings for accommodation. So I think in the accommodation sector it is the case that there's particular pressure, but it's more complicated than Mr Mundell says, I'm afraid, because you see within, for example, the self-catering sector, small units for one family have done reasonably well in some parts of the country and are continuing to do so. Well, he's muttering again. He does it all the time, Presiding Officer, Mr Mundell, from a sedentary position. If he wants to do that, that's up to him. But I want to give the answer. And the answer, continue the answer, which is that some businesses have managed to do reasonably well, whilst they can continue to trade lawfully. But larger self-catering premises, for example, serving more than 2, 3 or 4 families or larger units, have been hit extremely hard. So the position, I think, is really rather more complex than the member indicates.
Maureen Watt.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary indicate whether the UK Government has given any indication that it will give serious consideration to the series of financial measures outlined in the recommendations of the Scottish Tourism Recovery Task Force?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, it hasn't as yet. I would stress that I've had, I think 5 or 6 conference calls with Nigel Huddleston, the UK Tourism Minister. We have a good working relationship. The other devolved administrations are also on these calls. The most recent call was, I think, just towards the end of last week. And we have not yet had a response to the particular financial proposals in order to help the sector recover. And that includes a request for a business rates holiday from the Scottish Government, but a VAT reduction and other measures from the UK Government. But I am pleased to say that the recommendation from the task force that there should be a UK tourism summit where representatives from across these islands contribute to discuss these matters together has received a fair wind and a positive response. So we're in touch with Nigel Huddleston's office in order to make the necessary arrangements for that event, and that will allow the problems that we're discussing here to be raised across these islands, and I very much hope that that will lead to action by the UK Government as the task force has requested.
Question 3, Shona Robertson.
To ask the Scottish Government what support it's giving to businesses in the hospitality and food and drink sectors in response to the impact of each level of the COVID-19 strategic framework.
Cabinet Secretary.
The strategic framework sets out the Scottish Government's new package of support from 2nd of November, which will provide for eligible businesses grants of up to £3,000 for businesses required to close by law, and grants of up to £2,100 for those businesses that remain open but are specifically to modify their operations. These grants will be repayable every 4 weeks for the duration of the restrictions, and we continue to engage with specific sectors, including hospitality and food and drink, who may face unique impacts and consider how best to provide help and support.
Shona Robertson.
And I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer. Can the Cabinet Secretary say what discussions are taking place with Dundee City Council in regard to additional support after being placed into level 3? And can he provide an update as to funding which the Scottish Government has received from the UK Government to support business support measures here in Scotland and Dundee in particular?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we have undertaken detailed engagement with local authorities, including Dundee City Council, on our approach and allocation of tiers. We will continue to work with local authorities as far as possible to address any concerns and also to identify what further support might be required. The overall budget guarantee was recently increased by £1 billion, which we welcome. This is based on a best estimate of consequentials, which will flow to the Scottish Government to the period of 31st of March next year. However, we have not yet been provided with a detailed breakdown of this funding or for previous funding guarantees provided since July, and it's expected, Presiding Officer, this funding will be required to cover a number of actions, including public health initiatives, transport support, as well as support for business. We, of course, want to do all we can to support organisations through this crisis, and we continue to call on the UK Government to transfer additional fiscal levers to the Scottish Parliament so that we can have the flexibility to respond directly to the needs of the people of Scotland.
Question 4, Daniel Johnson.
Scottish Government how it will ensure that all bed and breakfast and guest houses will be eligible for financial support in response to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Cabinet Secretary.
We have supported B&Bs and guest houses as part of our package totalling over £2.3 billion. This includes almost £900 million in non-domestic rates relief, £1.3 billion via business grants, and £145 million package for SMEs and the self-employed. We have also made £3 million available to support B&Bs with no business bank account. Support grants are aimed at businesses required to close by law or at businesses that remain open but are directly impacted by restrictions. Scotland's lack of borrowing powers prevent us from fully responding to the economic crisis, and limited funds must mean that we have to target resources. But we are continuing to assess, Presiding Officer, what can be done with the additional consequentials recently announced, and we will, of course, consider support for businesses within the tourism industry as part of that.
Daniel Johnson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. In a previous answer, he referenced businesses that fell through the gaps of previous financial support packages. Bed and breakfasts were one such group, and I was contacted by multiple B&B owners who failed to get financial support because they lacked a business bank account. So can the Cabinet Secretary give a cast-iron guarantee now that if further restrictions are placed preventing those businesses from operating, that they will receive that financial support and not fall through the gaps once again?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think I did in part cover that with the original answer, but just let me reiterate that we are absolutely committed to providing assistance to business that require lifeline support. And I've already said that accommodation providers, including B&Bs and guest houses, have, I think, had a difficult time. There's no doubt about that. And we wish them to survive this crisis. We want, therefore, Presiding Officer, by analysing the Barnett consequential funds that we've received and how they can best be deployed in order to meet gaps and provide need and provide that lifeline support across the sector. And that is the work in which we're engaged as a matter of urgency, especially with regard to Parliament's express wishes yesterday evening. I want to assure members we are taking this matter extremely seriously, and I am having a meeting with officials later this afternoon on this topic.
I've seen members who have not had supplementaries in this session previously, and I'd like to try to take them all. So if you can be brief, please. Colin Smith will be followed by Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Government published their COVID framework, which stated that hospitality level 2 and 3 could open, albeit with different levels of restriction, but days later imposed regulations closing all non-food pubs and pubs that serve food but don't prepare it on site. Given that we now know those businesses can access the furlough scheme, whether they're closed or open, can the Cabinet Secretary tell us why the Government still refused to allow non-food pubs to open, utterly contradicting their own framework?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I do think that we need to strike a difficult balance between public health and lives and livelihoods. And it is sadly the case, Presiding Officer, that the expert health evidence that we have, the expert evidence that is contained within advice given to other administrations in these islands, and the advice given to governments all across Europe is the same. That people, well, again, Mr Smith likes to mutter from a sedentary position like Mr Mundell. But carrying on with the answer, Presiding Officer, it is the case that we have to take decisions to protect public health. And there is, according to the expert medical advice that we have, a proven increased risk of COVID infection where people gather together for longer than a certain time. That is something that we have to take very seriously. But of course, none of us want any restrictions to continue for a moment longer than they have to, and these things, therefore, are always kept under very careful review.
And Liam MacArthur will be followed by Claire Baker.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I echo Daniel Johnson's comments about the difficulty for self-catering and B&B businesses that didn't have a business bank account and were excluded initially from earlier schemes. Can the Cabinet Secretary therefore offer a guarantee to myself and to Mr Johnson that in any future programmes this mistake will not be made again and that businesses will not struggle to get access to the funds that they desperately need?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I do sympathise with the point Mr MacArthur makes, and I want just to repeat what I said in my original answer. We have made £3 million available to support B&Bs with no business bank account. So this is a problem that we've encountered before and a problem that we dealt with before. I very much hope, therefore, Presiding Officer, that that has happened. It logically follows that if a business has suffered in a particular way, then provided it can establish that it's operating as a business, as opposed to a non-commercial business, then, of course, the fact that it doesn't have a bank account should not prevent it from qualifying for compensation. That, broadly, Mr MacArthur, was the rationale that we decided last time. We did want to distinguish between, for example, Airbnb properties, where perhaps someone was making a bit of money for a few days a year or something like that on a personal basis from a bona fide business. And we must be careful with public money. We must make sure that we do not use this money in such a way that it allows fraudulent applications. That has been the subject of some publicity, particularly in regard to other schemes administered by the UK. It's a very difficult balancing task, but I did want to impress on Mr MacArthur and his constituents that I'm looking very sympathetically at this. I do not think that simply because one doesn't have a business bank account that should prevent one from obtaining compensation if, as a business, you've been severely impacted by the COVID virus.
Claire Baker.
Thank you. The business restrictions grant is only available to a prescribed list of eligible businesses, which doesn't reflect the impact of the restrictions on other businesses. Will the Scottish Government review the list of eligible businesses who can receive the restrictions grant, and how can businesses be added to that list? Or will the Scottish Government give flexibility to local authorities to decide which businesses are important to their local economy and are suffering from the impact of the current restrictions?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think I have indicated, Presiding Officer, quite clearly, and to be fair to a number of different members across the chamber, that we are looking at how best we can use the additional Barnett consequentials in order to meet real need to help businesses survive. That's the fundamental principle here. And if that means that we need to revisit previous decisions, of course, in principle, that is something we should do. I do think it is perhaps better that we apply an approach to similar businesses across Scotland in a uniform fashion. In other words, I wouldn't want businesses to lose out just because of the particular area in which they happen to be operating. But on the other hand, we have worked very closely with local authorities, and they have effectively delivered the grant finance earlier in the year. So I will look sympathetically at the request that Claire Baker has made. It is part of the overall mix in the work that we are doing at the moment as a matter of urgency, and which I think I've now mentioned on more than one occasion, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. Question 5 is withdrawn and question 6 has not been lodged, so that concludes portfolio questions. I'll let it run on a little longer, and it's time to move on to the next item of business after a brief pause.